Good morning. Welcome to the Point. It has been a remarkable 2 weeks in politics, starting with the State of the State, a visit of the president, the Iowa caucuses, the State of the Union, the governor's response, and the new budget season has started. Let's start this morning with a look back at the State of the Union, minus the missing handshake and literally ripping of the speech.
I am thrilled to report to you tonight that our economy is the best it has ever been. Our military is completely rebuilt, with its power being unmatched anywhere in the world, and it's not even close. Our borders are secure, our families are flourishing, our values are renewed, our pride is restored. And for all of these reasons, I say to the people of our great country and to the members of Congress, the state of our union is stronger than ever before. In 8 years under the last administration, over 300,000 working-age people dropped out of the workforce. In just 3 years of my administration, 3.5 million people, working-age people, have joined the workforce. Since my election, the net worth of the bottom half of wage earners has increased by 47%, 3 times faster than the increase for the top 1%. Many politicians came and went pledging to change or replace NAFTA, only to do so, and then absolutely nothing happened. But unlike so many who came before me, I keep my promises. We did our job.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer was given the high-profile assignment of giving the Democratic response to the president's speech.
I'd need a lot more than 10 minutes to respond to what the president just said. So instead of talking about what he is saying, I'm going to highlight what Democrats are doing. After all, you can listen to what someone says, but to know the truth, watch what they do. Every Democrat running for president has a plan to expand health care for all Americans. Every one of them has supported the Affordable Care Act with coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. They may have different plans, but the goal is the same. President Trump sadly has a different plan. He's asking the courts to rip those life-saving protections away. It's pretty simple. Democrats are trying to make your health care better. Republicans in Washington are trying to take it away. It doesn't matter what the president says about the stock market. What matters is that millions of people struggle to get by or don't have enough money at the end of the month after paying for transportation, student loans, or prescription drugs. American workers are hurting. In my own state, our neighbors in Wisconsin and Ohio, Pennsylvania, and all over the country. Wages have stagnated while CEO pay has skyrocketed. So when the president says the economy is strong, my question is, strong for whom?
On Thursday, the governor laid out her budget priorities for the coming year. We talked with the chief Democratic appropriator in the Senate, Senator Curtis Hertel Jr. Senator, you've been through the budget process a lot, and this most recent recommendation from the governor, at least from my standpoint, looks quite a bit different. There's no big revenue ask in there that I can find. So give me your impression. I know you haven't been through all of it yet either.
Well, I think it's important investments in 3 big categories. One is our schools and education, a huge increase in investment in preschool, a huge increase in K-12. So I think that's really important. A big investment in families. You look at, for state of Michigan employees, adding maternity and paternity leave, even in cases of adoption. The federal government has done that. A lot of major companies have done that. This is a big thing, I think, for families here in Michigan, the state leading by example. Investments in health for families, a big increase in the amount of money for lead remediation in houses. We have a huge problem with lead paint still in Michigan. We talk a lot about lead in our water, but actually most kids in Michigan are poisoned by paint. A dime-sized piece of pre-1970s lead-based paint can poison a 4-year-old. Just one little small piece, and it's sweet, so they put it in their mouth. And so this is money to actually remediate homes, something that I've been working on since the Granholm administration. I think is incredibly important. And then the last big piece was investment in the environment. And I think that's really important too. Money to help deal with Asian carp, which we think is a big problem, and an investment for cities to provide grants for changing climate and moving away from fossil fuels. So I think if you look at it in total, big major investments in good policy areas that I think are important to the people of Michigan.
One of the things that I asked the governor about after the presentation with the budget director was that very last piece that you talked about environment, Asian carp, and some of those kind of things. And one of the things in West Michigan that we're seeing in a really acute way is the high water levels, lack of freeze, and all of the other things, and the amazing amount of erosion along our lakeshore. And she said that maybe even some of that goes
Absolutely. The investments are for cities and localities to look at their individual issues and help try to solve them. So, I think that's important because obviously we have PFAS in some parts of the state, we have soil erosion in some parts of the state, we have coal peat in some places in the state. We have lots of different issues in different places, and so we should be providing funds to try to do all those. There was also a large amount for just cleanup, which I think is important as well. So obviously down in Metro Detroit you have the Green Ooze. So this is really a good budget for the environment and invest in cleanup, in clean air, clean water, and that's all I think important for everybody.
There is a new way, maybe not a new way, at least a new time schedule for budgeting because of the way things kind of came off the tracks last year.
Absolutely.
So now July 1st is going to be the deadline for the legislature, you and your Republican counterparts, to get your version of a budget. But that means you have to do something initially to figure out what the legislature wants to do versus what the governor wants to do. Then you have to negotiate that out, hopefully.
Sure.
That's the way that's supposed to work.
The way it should work, yes.
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And then, during the month of June, I assume you kind of hammer out, fine tune, and get it to the governor. As I say, you've done this before.
Yes.
Tell me how this is going to look. How is that going to work?
I think it will work well. I think we've all probably learned from last budget cycle. There were long periods of time where people weren't talking. I think that as long as we're talking and staying in the room and working with each other, most problems can be solved. I always say that people at home, they're not Republicans or Democrats mostly. They're just people that want us to fix their roads and want to make sure the water coming out of their tap is clean and that they can send their kid to a quality school and that they can afford to send their kid to college if they want to. They just want us to work together, talk to each other, and figure those things out. I think too often partisan politics can get in the way of that. So I think that we hopefully learned a lot of lessons this last election cycle, or this last budget cycle, and we'll work together because we don't want to become like Washington, D.C., where you basically have two sides yelling at each other and not a whole lot getting done. People expect us to work together and solve Michigan's problems.
The overall increase was 3.9%, I think, for the whole budget. Takes it up to $61.9, almost $62 billion. We know that the majority of that money is the federal pass-through that comes through. About $11 billion for the general fund. And I always describe the general fund as the money that funds everything in government that you see.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
And so,
except for schools.
That's right. And that's about that's almost $16 billion, $15.9 billion. That's the biggest it's ever been.
Yeah.
So starting with the general fund, that's also the biggest it's ever been. So as you go into this, I guess the first question I would ask, or that anybody at home would ask, is all that money going to be there? Will the revenue estimations support the figures the governor put in?
I think they will be. Obviously, we still have some money left over from last year that we still haven't spent. And there are some serious concerns out there still with some of the lawsuits that were left by the governor's predecessor. So I think we have some concerns there. And so we have to be somewhat fiscally responsible. But I think that the governor in general was careful to put some money away for emergencies in the budget and still look at it. It is the largest budget ever, but I would like to remind people at home that you have to look at inflation as well. If you look at this budget versus 20 years ago, it is pretty much flat. And inflationary speaking, well under what we were spending. If you were looking just inflationary, we'd be spending almost 50% more than we are now. So Michigan government's pretty lean. I think it's affected a lot of the things we do in a negative way. But I think the governor was creative and found some interesting ideas to put forward, and I support them.
The governor in her State of the State and the day after the State of the State made good on her promise to bond
Yes.
to fix the roads. After starting with 45-cent gallon gas tax
Yes.
last year, got no traction on that, and made the budget process harder. My words, not yours. But
No, absolutely true.
and so she said, look, I'm not going to wait. Impatience is a virtue.
Yep.
So she wanted
Totally
to get it
agree.
done. And so she got that done. That takes that pressure off, no matter what Republicans, Democrats, no matter what you think about it. That's not a legislative issue now. Does that clear the way, from your perspective, for the legislature to say, well, maybe we don't like that, but that's what that is. Now here's our problem. That goes to the main trunk lines. That's
Yep.
not going to fit. That's not going to fix the street right out here in
That's
front
right,
of the
yeah.
office building. Does that give the legislature, do you think, more incentive to come up with some money to do something about local roads?
I mean, I think the incentive should be there because the people are clamoring for it. I mean, I think people are tired of the potholes in their neighborhood. They're tired of the potholes on their way to work. And yes, some of those are on trunk line roads and we have to fix them, and I applaud the governor for what she did. It'll save the people money in the long run because we're bonding at a rate that's less than 2%, and every year the actual damage is much worse than that. So you end up, fixing the same road over and over again. This will actually be repaving roads, so we won't be actually filling that same pothole over and over and over again. So we'll save money and actually have better roads because of it. But you're 100% right that does nothing for the local roads. The legislature has got to step up here. One of the frustrations I think the governor had and that I had was that the other side of the aisle said they'd put a plan. They'd announce it at the Mackinac Policy Conference in May, and then they would announce it in June, and then July, and then August, and then we got to the end of the budget process, and they still had never really put a plan on the table. I think the governor's willing to negotiate. I'm willing to negotiate. We got to solve this. We got to work together, but it takes two sides. And so the governor's going to go ahead and fix the state roads without the legislature. I'm happy she's going to do that. I hope that we'll all work together and actually solve this for the people of Michigan. They can't. I think people are tired of it. They're tired of the bent rims. They're tired of the blown out tires. They just want somebody to solve this problem for them. And we can work together and do that. But it will take revenue. And no one likes raising taxes. I voted against the last gas tax increase, but I voted against it for a very specific reason. Because I think if you have to raise the right amount. And to raise taxes and not solve a problem is the ultimate insult to the people. We just raised taxes to say we solved it. And so I voted no that time. If we can come up with a real plan that will actually invest in our local roads, I think that the Michigan people would support it. I think they're willing to pay more if they know we're going to solve a problem.
Obviously, the budget process has just started. When we come back, we'll hear from a Republican appropriator from the House. Next, To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. The budget process has started for the new fiscal year that will begin in October. We all remember the problems last year when negotiations broke down. One Republican appropriator in the House says there are still questions about how the process will go, but he is cautiously optimistic. Here's State Representative Mark Huizenga from Walker. Representative, one of the things I think is most interesting, some people may not, but I think the appropriations process here in Lansing is fascinating because you start with an estimate of how much money you're going to have. Then you get recommendations from the administration, but you are still holders of the purse. The legislature still has to come up with a final spending plan. With all of that in mind, as this week passes, you've now seen the governor's recommendations for the next fiscal year, which begins in October. And I know you haven't had a chance to go through it. You just showed me the stack of books. I got 2 pages, you got 2 books.
Yeah.
So you haven't gone through it all, but give me your kind of broad brushstroke impression.
Yeah, we got our 4-inch binders today. It's full of lots of information. As chair of the general government budget, we have essentially the government in our committee. We're responsible for all the funding from Department of Treasury through DTMB, which does procurement, buildings, operations, and it's really the backbone of what the state of Michigan has. When I heard the budget presentation today, really the 3 categories of education, skills, health and families, climate and water, there were things that I liked in there, there were things that I didn't like in there. And I think it's important to recognize that we want to work in a bipartisan fashion. Last year we did the same thing. As a freshman last year, the budget process was new to me. I learned a lot, but I also learned that we have to trust each other And some of the things that she put in there in education is actually not new. Reconnect was launched last year, and it's being relaunched again. But there are many structural deficits associated with that program. For instance, how do we know if you live in a county that doesn't have a millage, how do we make sure that those people are getting their obligations fulfilled, that we have access to all? And I think as a state, that's really what we need to work on, is making sure that it's fair and equitable for people, but also protect the hardworking taxpayers in communities that do have millages for community colleges. I like the program, but again, it was launched last year. Not really much happened with it. We'll try it again this year. But again, details matter, and we need to figure out a lot of details. This program was based off of what's happening in Tennessee with their program. I had a chance to go down there and learn about their program. In Michigan, it's very different. So I think that we'll have to be doing some really deep dives in the details there.
The Reconnect, and just so quickly we can explain, that's an effort to get people trained for existing skilled trades jobs, hundreds of thousands of which in the state go unfilled, and that's part of what this is.
Yeah, and that's right. And in my mind, last year the governor, in her recommendation, she included the Going Pro program, a great program that helps do exactly that same kind of thing. Helps employers, though, helps them to get their employees better skills, especially small employers. It was in her recommendation. The House and Senate passed it. Unfortunately, that was one that took the vetoes. And she has it back again this year. And I guess at this juncture, we have to wonder, can we trust it? Do we know that it's going to be back there? And even though we fund it, will it be ultimately vetoed or not? And so there's a trust factor here that we need to broach and figure out if this is going to work or not. Obviously, we have to constitutionally have the budget put together. This is a new year. We have to have it done by July 1 this year. But we'll continue to work hard. But like the governor said the other day, trust but verify. We have to trust each other. But actions speak louder than words. And a lot of times when we see programs like this that we all believe in, it's difficult to feel that trust when we've been betrayed with a major cut like that.
Well, that brings up an interesting question. At the very moment that you are getting the new budget recommendations, there are still millions and millions of dollars of unfunded programs that are left behind by the end of the year vetoes that the governor put out there. And I know that there is some consideration about supplementals. In fact, I think there are a couple of supplementals that are already floating around. But one that keeps popping up is the one for Pure Michigan. The governor restored less than half of the amount of funding that you as a legislature provided for this current year. But this current year, there's no funding. It was zeroed out with a veto. So
Right.
How difficult is it to at once try to look at what's going to happen if it's approved in October for the new budget year while you're still trying to figure out the current budget
Right.
year?
Well, that's true. And right now, we're in that process of planning meetings for the next several weeks for our committees to get together and talk about this. Last year when we started off, I asked my minority vice chair, again, in a bipartisan fashion, what's important to you? Pure Michigan was important to Terry Sabo. He's on the Lake Shore. This is something that we all benefit by, and we hit in the budget. I supported it, he supported it, the governor vetoed it. All that money is sitting on the balance sheet right now, and that's not really appropriate. We need to make sure that hardworking taxpayer dollars go to work right away. It doesn't do any good to pay petty politics and have that money sit there when there are people that need those programs. In fact, I was at a meeting a couple weeks ago in Rockford where a resident talked about the fact that her small company benefited highly from the Going Pro program. She said when she submitted her new request that the program wasn't funded and to try back later that maybe the funds would be there. That's not fair to people.
I hear in your conversation, it's not just about these priorities. It's about still not having resolved everything that happened last year between the Republican-led legislature and this Democratic governor. Is there a dialogue? Is there an effort to try to kind of bind up those fractures that came last year? Is there anything going on that front?
Sure. Well, I think on one hand, you can look at the budget, but what we do here is more than just the budget. As an appropriator, obviously the money is a big thing. We had issues last year that were identified throughout the budget. I was appointed chair of a task force to look at the way that we purchase information technology. It was a bipartisan task force. We gave the report this week, in fact, to the Appropriations Committee, the full committee. Very proud of the work that we did there. But you know what we did, Rick? We worked with departments. We worked in a bipartisan fashion. We worked to find solutions, and we worked with departments to help find ways to make them work better And instead of treating the legislature and the departments as having an antagonist relationship, we work very closely with them to find solutions. And that's really what it's about. We have to do that. The people that sent us here, whether the Republicans or Democrats, we have to fight for them to make sure they get the right thing at the right price. And it's all hardworking taxpayer dollars.
One of the things that the governor talked about in the budget that caught my ear, if you will, and that is talking about fighting effects of climate change, but even more specifically talking about high water levels, which certainly have plagued the lakeshore, but not just the lakeshore, because the high water certainly affects storm drains and other things. Not a lot of money, a $40 million grant package in there, but perhaps a beginning. Are there things in this that you look at and say, yeah, that's where we need to go?
I guess there's one thing that really struck my heart is knowing that we're going to try to do more with lead abatement and try to help. I think, the Flint water crisis brought lead to a head and really brought it to the forefront of what's going on in Michigan. But the truth of the matter is that when you look at lead and lead poisoning, so much of that comes primarily from lead paint. And finding ways to mitigate that, that's important. That's not a partisan issue. That's good for all of us in making those decisions. That's something I can get behind and support.
When you look at a almost $62 billion dollar budget, you've got 140 plus days, that's counting Saturdays and Sundays, to come to something that looks like an agreement with the governor. You mentioned it earlier. There's a new paradigm that the budgets have to be done by July 1st. There are a lot of reasons for that, not the least of which is that's when the fiscal year starts for public schools. And in years past, it has not been unusual for them to start their school year and not know for perhaps a month or 2 months what their operating budget's going to be. Is that going to be something you guys can hit? Can you hit the mark of July 1st?
Yeah, we met last week and started to talk about it with our team to identify what the calendar is going to look like. It's a little bit more aggressive. Last year, constitutionally, the governor has an extra month the first time through to get that out there. But under the Snyder administration, those budgets were completed on time and on budget. We can do it, we will, and we should. It's good for not only the schools, but municipalities, and making sure that we can give them a number so that they can plan for their budgets as well.
Is there one thing in this budget that you could say, after looking at it for only a short period of time, that just won't happen?
I think it's too early to say that. I haven't really had a chance to digest it. I know that we'll continue to work for hardworking taxpayers. One item that, of course, is out there is revenue sharing. I saw that there was an increase in that, and having been a former mayor, that's important to me, and I know it's important to all those constituents across the state. Not only is it important, but I think especially with the road bonding program, those bonds really don't impact West Michigan very much. And making sure that we have revenue sharing that's going to be strong, that impacts local roads, county roads, and state roads. We need to make sure that it's not just our state roads.
As the representative pointed out, there are new rules this year about when the budget has to be done. The fiscal year doesn't start until October, but the legislature is now required to get the budget to the governor by July 1st. We'll be following the progress of that. We'll have more when I come back to the point. So after a remarkable couple of weeks from a political standpoint, we move forward. There are still more primaries and caucuses to come. Super Tuesday is just around the corner. And 1 week later in Michigan, Democrats will go to the polls to choose their choice for a Democratic presidential candidate. But over these past 2 weeks, we have seen the focus of politics right here in the state of Michigan. You can expect that to continue all the way through November. Michigan will figure large when it comes to the Electoral College count for both Republicans and Democrats, and that's something we'll be keeping an eye on. All the time, in Lansing, keeping an eye on that budget process and whatever else may develop there. There's a lot to do every week, and I know you keep a busy schedule, so I hope you'll put us on yours every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. when we talk about all things politics right here on Wood TV 8 for To The Point.